Crime Files of Los Angeles digs into the old criminal files to review what were the true facts, some of the most interesting and sensational cases of all times. Here we go behind the scenes to review what the detectives did in the investigation, how they tracked down the criminals. Further, we examine the jury trial to see what evidence was presented to the jury. And in the end, we reveal the results of the case as well as what happened to all of those various characters in the case. So let's get started today on the case that we've selected to examine. What were the facts? The Killing Fields of Cambodia, or should we call it the Killing Fields of Los Angeles? And here we have a locket of a young lady. What does that have to do with the Killing Fields of Cambodia? Well, let's go to the date of Sunday, February 25th, 1996. A Cambodian gentleman wanted to visit some of his friends, a couple that was living down in Long Beach, California. So he drove down there, and they had a good time together. They had dinner, and they talked about the old days back in Cambodia, not necessarily the good days, but all that they went through. And it was most likely getting to about 10 o'clock in the evening, and he decided to come back, and he comes back to downtown Los Angeles, driving up this street to his place in Chinatown. And here you can see his apartment, where the light is. That was his apartment, two-bedroom apartment. And the route that he took to get to his place was coming up the alleyway behind his apartment. And here you can see kind of a windy way up the alleyway, and then he pulled into the carport behind his apartment. There you can see in this photo the arrow pointing to where his car came to rest in his carport. So he readied himself getting out of the car, getting all of his papers and pictures that he had taken, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, people come up to the side of him and they demand things. They demand money, or they demand something, and all of a sudden there were shots. Shots were fired, and this man, he stumbles out of his car and he falls dead on the cold concrete of the carport of his apartment. So what is this all about? Is this a robbery? Robbery gone bad? Or is it something else? Well, let's look at the evidence. Well, he had money, cash, in his pocket, as well as in his wallet. There's all of his credit cards. Everything was there. Everything was in order. Also, his car was there. It was a nice Mercedes. His key was there, so the people could easily have stolen his Mercedes. But what was taken, if anything? Well, what we know was taken when the detectives got there, he was missing his Rolex watch. And he had been wearing that watch when he was with his friends down in Long Beach. And also what was missing was that he always had a locket and a gold chain around his neck. And it was missing. It was gone. Why? Why was it missing? A Rolex watch and a locket with a gold chain. Well, I'm going to have to think about all that, consider the evidence. So time is going on, and the detectives of the homicide, go out and they start their investigation. And they're going through the different steps of the things that they should be doing. And the first thing they decide to do is print the car for latent prints. And they dusted it and looked everywhere for any type of fingerprint, and there weren't any. There weren't any ones that they could compare back to anyone in particular. So that was very disappointing. That didn't lead anywhere. Then they started looking in the other apartments in dumpsters, thinking that maybe somebody had dumped the gun or some other evidence. So they didn't find anything in any of the trash containers near the apartment. So what else? Well, they wanted to find a gun if they could find one, and they didn't. No gun was ever found. And you need a gun to compare it to the shell casings. And there were shell casings because it was an automatic and the shells had been fired and shot out. And also there were bullets, fragments from bullets that were recovered from the car. And those could be used for ballistic purposes if they could find a gun, if they could tie a gun to this case. But there was no gun that was ever recovered. The other thing they wanted to find out was the victim in the car at the time of the shooting. And here they put rods or dowels through the holes in the seats, and they could determine that the person who shot the victim was outside the car. Most likely the door might have been open or the window was down, but that was all they could tell from that. Then they went from neighbor to neighbor, looking out to see if there was anything that the neighbor might have seen. And one of the neighbors said, yeah, by the red circle there, yeah, I saw some guys, I heard the shots, but it was so dark. It was so dark, so I couldn't see who it was. And so we could not identify anyone. Now what happened next was, who was the victim? Now to make a determination who that victim was, well, it was a gentleman by the name of Haing Ngor. And he was an immigrant. He was working as a counselor downtown in Chinatown at an immigrant center for Cambodians. And he would help anybody who came into the facility, find a place to live, find a job. He had been through it. He knew what it was like because he was an immigrant himself who had come to Los Angeles. He came from Cambodia, and he found his way to Los Angeles, and he was glad to be there in Los Angeles. Now, he left the killing fields of Cambodia. He lived through it. He knew what it was like. There were fields and fields of skulls and skeletons all over the place. And what was that all about? Well, there was a group called the Khmer Rouge that came into power. They were a communist group, and Pol Pot was the prime minister. And they had a concept of what needed to be done for the country of Cambodia, and they started out on that. They wanted to go to year zero, meaning restart civilization. They wanted an agrarian collectivization. All the people from the city had to move out of the city and go back to the rural areas, to the rice paddies, and work on these little tiny farms. Well, it was quite a transition for all those people, especially from the city, who weren't used to living that way. There wasn't enough food. There was no medical attention. If you complained, the Khmer Rouge would kill you. You'd be executed. So it was very, very tough times for everyone in Cambodia. And we call this the Khmer Rouge experiment from 1976 to 1979. There were millions and millions of people killed. As a matter of fact, 21% of the population of Cambodia died during that period of time. Over 2 million people. So it was very tough times for the Cambodian people, and that's why it was called the Killing Fields period of time. Now, when I was over in Cambodia a while back, I wanted to find out the Khmer Rouge, and this building I took a photograph of was an old school. And the Khmer Rouge used this as their headquarters, and they would bring people, Cambodians there, and torture them to get information from them. And if they didn't cooperate, they executed them there. So many people were killed in this building. Many, many years later, the Cambodian people built these monuments, and it has a lot of skulls in there with names of the people who had been killed. So that was what was happening from the Khmer Rouge. Now, what happened during this period of time. The Vietnam War from 1963 to 75 was terrible for Cambodia because so many of the Vietnamese and the Viet Cong would go over to Cambodia, and it destabilized the government in Cambodia. And it caused a revolution to begin that changed the entire country of Cambodia. And in 1975, Phnom Penh, the capital, it fell to the Khmer Rouge, and all these people had to find a place to live. It was very, very, very difficult for the population of Cambodia. Now, there were news papers and TV from all over the world came to Cambodia to report on this revolution. And the New York Times was one of the newspapers that sent a reporter to Cambodia, and they sent Sidney Schonberg to be the reporter to find out what it was all about. Now, he didn't speak Cambodian, he didn't know anything about the country, so he relied on this interpreter, photographer, DITH PRAN, who helped him out so much in guiding him to the place where the stories really were and what was really happening in Cambodia. The two of them became very close friends. They relied on each other. They depended, for each other's help. Now, when it came to 1975, Schonberg realized he had to get out of the country. He was going to be executed by the Khmer Rouge if he didn't leave. So he didn't know how to get out, but it was DITH PRAN who figured out a way how he could escape because he had a passport and there was a way for him to get out. However, DITH PRAN didn't have a passport and there was no way that he could escape from the Khmer Rouge. So he had to stay there during all of the troubling times. So the story of DITH PRAN was written by Sidney Schonberg. When he got back to New York, he wrote about it, what was going on, what DITH PRAN had to endure. And as a matter of fact, he won a number of awards, the Pulitzer Prize, for his journalism on this story. Many people read it and they were impressed by it, of the misery that DITH PRAN and all these other Cambodians had to go through. Now, he was able to make it from 1975 to 1980, and Sidney was able to get him out, bring him to New York, and as a matter of fact, DITH became a photographer for the New York Times when he arrived there in New York, and that's where he worked for many, many, many years. So he's out, and what is going on? The story that was written, Death, Life, and DITH PRAN, was written by Sidney. It was another book. Hollywood read it, they loved it, and they wanted to make a movie of it. And, well, how do we make a movie about the killing fields in Cambodia? They needed to talk to somebody to learn about it. So there was a British producer who was going to do this movie, The Killing Fields, and he looked around in Hollywood for somebody who knew about it. And he finally came across this gentleman, Haing Ngor, who knew all about it. He was a counselor for immigrants from Cambodia, and he said, yeah, I know all about it, I can tell you about it. And he worked with the producer and helped him out immensely. And after a while, the producer said, well, you know, we've got to make this movie and we need somebody to play the part of DITH PRAN. And, you know, we can't find anybody. And they turned to Haing Ngor and said, you know, would you be the actor for DITH PRAN? And Haing Ngor said, of course not. I'm a doctor. I was a doctor in Cambodia. I'm a counselor here in Los Angeles. I'm not an actor in any way, never did any acting classes. They said, we need you. You know the story. And he played the part. And I don't know whether you can say he played the part. Did he live the part? He had lived through the killing fields. He knew all about it. So when he was doing the movie, he knew how to act and what the Cambodian people went through. So his performance was riveting, and people were so impressed with it, so much so that in 1985 he won an Academy Award, an Oscar, for The Killing Field, and he won the Golden Globe Award. He won the British Academy Filmmaking Award. He did such a convincing job that he impressed many people in Hollywood of his acting talent, even though he never took an acting class ever. Now, Haing Ngor and DITH became very, very close friends because of the movie, and they admired each other. They had both survived the killing field. And I always like to compare the lives of the two of them. Their age is almost identical, their background a little bit different, but they both had to endure the Khmer Rouge, the killing field. They had to survive it, and one ended up, meaning DITH ended up in New York. On the other hand, Ngor, he ended up in Los Angeles. So very similar lives that both men lived. Now, Haing Ngor, became known as an actor, and he performed in many, many movies and in TV shows. So he was a very prominent actor after the killing fields, and he was also a writer. He wrote a book, The Cambodian Odyssey, by Haing Ngor. Very popular book, and he made a lot of money from his acting and his writing, but he put all that money back into the country of Cambodia. He sent money back to the schools, back to the hospitals. He wanted to help the people, the struggle that the Cambodian people had gone through, and he knew what it was like because he had lived it. Now, some of you might say, where's Cambodia? It's a small country in Southeast Asia. Thailand and Laos are on the north side. Vietnam is on the east side and south side. And as far as a country, it really starts out as a French colony. And we kind of think of it as Indochina. It was part of the French Union. And eventually, I think it was in 1953, it became an independent country of Cambodia. So that was a history of the country. Not an old country, but it's a beautiful, beautiful country. It has the temples at Angkor Wat. They're so impressive. They were built, I think it was 1150 AD. There's a moat that goes all the way around it, and you have these towers that go high up into the sky. Quite an interesting temple. And there's nothing more exciting than to be there at 4 o'clock in the morning and watch the sun come up. You're looking at the clouds in the sky, and you see these rays of sunlight coming in, and you see the towers, the silhouette of the towers. What an impressive sight to behold. There is so much to see in Angkor Wat. There are many temples all around the area there. And the jungle kind of has taken over a lot of the area. The roots go into everything. And, some people say, well, all you have to do is cut the roots down, cut the trees down. But if you did, all the buildings would go crumbling down because they're supported by those huge roots that hold them up in place. So there's so much to see in the grounds all around of Angkor Wat. And the way that you get around from temple to temple is by a motorcycle with a trailer on the rear. There's hundreds of these little motorcycles that transport you around like a taxi cab wherever you want to go. They pick you up and they take you and you jump out. Now, let's get back to our story. Why was Haing Ngor killed? Was it the Khmer Rouge that killed him? Or was it robbers who killed him? Well, first, let's examine regarding the Khmer Rouge. Well, they still existed during this period of time. They were still in control of the northern part of Cambodia. As a matter of fact, the UN recognized Pol Pot as the leader, the prime minister of Cambodia. But as the detectives checked into it, they couldn't find any connection between the Khmer Rouge or anybody that they had sent to Los Angeles to kill Haing Ngor. So that angle of the case really didn't work out. So they had to look at the robbery aspect of it. Would Haing Ngor have resisted some robbers? And that would be the reason why they shot him. Well, we have to look at his background. He married Ho Chang. She was a school teacher. They were sweethearts. They got married. He was a gynecologist. She was a teacher in Phnom Penh. They had a wonderful life, wonderful life. And all of a sudden, in 1975, they had to move to a little tiny village in the outskirts, and it was very, very difficult. And Ho Chan was pregnant at the time, and she had complications from her pregnancy, and she died. She died from these complications because Haing Ngor couldn't say anything. He couldn't claim that he was a doctor, or he would have been killed, because Khmer Rouge did not like any intellectuals. So when she died, all he had was this photograph, and he made it into a locket. And this is a locket that he wore. He wore forever. Everywhere he went, he wore this locket around his neck because his wife meant so much to him, and this is the only photograph that he had of her. So, would he have resisted if somebody tried to steal this locket by pulling it off of his neck? Well, maybe he did. Now, how was the case solved? It was solved in a kind of a strange way. The detectives were out in the alleyway, and they were trying to take measurements, and they see this gentleman at the far end, and they go up to him and say, well, do you know anything about the shooting that occurred here? And he said, well, yeah, sort of. I was in a car with a friend of mine, and 3 guys came up to us and said they wanted a ride, and we said, no, we're not going anywhere. And they left, and they walked up the alleyway up to the carport there, and then we heard several shots. And then we took off running. They took off running and went further up the alleyway. And the detective said, well, who were these people? Can you identify who they are? And, well, yeah, they were Oriental lazy boys. Yeah, what's their name? Well, they gave them the name. These were the names of the 3 of them. And the driver, they talked to him, and he said, yeah, those are the guys that we saw up there at the time of the shooting, and they took off running. So the detectives decided to pick up the 3 of them, take them to Parker Center, the headquarters of LAPD, and interview them. And they interviewed each one separately. And as they pulled them apart separate and talked to them, they said, what do you know about it? And at first they denied knowing anything about it. But eventually they admitted, yeah, we were out to jack somebody. We were going to steal something from someone, and we were just looking for a victim. But they all admit, yeah, he got shot, but I didn't do the shooting. I didn't do the shooting. It was the other guys who did the shooting. No one would admit that they did the shooting, but they all admitted taking part in the robbery. So now they had that as evidence, and the detectives then were able to present that to the DA's office, and the DA's office filed charges against the 3 suspects and filed charges for murder and robbery. Now, the DA had a dilemma here because of the law. There's 3 defendants now, and if you're going to try them together in one trial, you can't use the statement of one defendant against the other defendants. So the only way you could do something like that is you'd have to have 3 separate trials. But there's difficulties when you have separate trials because each time a witness testifies, they might testify slightly different. And the later trials, the defense attorneys would use that against the witness. So the judge eventually agreed to have one trial, but with 3 separate juries. And that's what they had. And you can imagine the courtroom. There were 12 jurors in the jury box, and there were 12 jurors in the spectator area, and there was 12 jurors next to the bailiff and the alternates. So it was a packed courtroom with jurors. So they all listened to the evidence as it was presented, and the witnesses were called, and the witnesses come in to testify. And they're sitting there on the witness stand, and the prosecutor asked him questions, did you see these guys do anything? And he said, no, I didn't see them do anything. I don't know what you're talking about. No, I don't know anything about any robbery or any guys or any shots being fired in the alleyway. And the prosecutor, what is he going to do? Here's the witness denying ever making any statement to the detectives. The witness was scared to death that he was going to be killed by the lazy boys if he testified. And he knew he was dead if he testified against admit on the witness stand that he saw them do it. There was another witness who saw the 3 of them with a gun, a 9mm gun, just like this one. And he said, yeah, they had this, and they all were talking together, looking at the gun, and they said, hey, we're going to jack somebody. We'll get some money for some cocaine. So they left. But now when this witness got on the witness stand, he denied it. He had amnesia. Now what the prosecutor did, he called the detectives. Did you take a tape recording of these witness statements? And they said, yeah, I did. So when the witnesses were called to the witness stand, they played the tape recording and said, is this your voice? No, no, no. Did you say this? No, no, no. But the jurors heard it. They heard these witnesses' statements from the recording. So this is the way the evidence got to the jurors. Now the case was tried in the criminal courts building, and all 3 juries reached a verdict of guilty of murder and robbery, and all 3 of them received some form of a life sentence with various amounts of prison time that they were going to have to serve. So that was the result of the trial. Now, I want to talk about what happened to the various parties that we've just discussed. Pol Pot, he was the Prime Minister of Cambodia, and he was for years and years, up in the northern part of Cambodia, recognized as the Prime Minister. Even though he had killed and been instrumental in killing millions, he died of poisoning, I think it was in 1986, and he died from the poisoning. Nobody knew for certain as to who did it, but somebody wanted to get rid of him. Now, as far as the actor Sam Waterston, who played Sidney Schoenberg, you still see him on television, on Law and Order. He's the prosecutor in that series. Now, as far as Haing Ngor, he was buried over in Rose Hill Cemetery in Whittier, and this is his tombstone. What has gone on since his death is that his niece, who came with him to America, she has set up what is called the Haing Ngor Foundation, and it raises money every year to send money back to Cambodia, to these various schools, the various hospitals that need funding, and it still goes on to this day, the Haing Ngor Foundation. Now, as to the other parties in this case, DITH PRAN, he died in 2008, pancreatic cancer, and it was Sidney Schoenberg who gave the eulogy and explained how DITH PRAN, what a wonderful person he was, how he had saved his life in Cambodia, how he had done so much for Sidney and for so many people. Now, Sidney, as a matter of fact, he died in 2016. He had been working as a journalist professor, and he had a heart attack and passed away. Now, as far as Cambodia, what is it like today? Well, it's still a beautiful, beautiful place, a poor country. It's got a lot of history, a lot of tourism. People go there to see the Angkor Wat temples. Wonderful place to visit if you ever have a chance. Los Angeles, does life go on there? Yes. And this is apartment of Haing Ngor, still there today. Hasn't changed any. And not too long ago, I wanted to go see the carport area. What does it look like today? It looks exactly the way it did when Haing Ngor pulled his car in there and he was shot and he died on that cold concrete slab there of the carport. And you have to think about it. His life, all the suffering that he went through in the killing fields of Cambodia, only to die in the killing fields of Los Angeles. What a shame. What a shame. What a wonderful life that he had when he came to America. If you want more information on the killing fields of Los Angeles, you can get my book, Killings on Route 66. What was interesting, this occurred just off of Route 66. Well, hopefully you found the killing fields of Los Angeles interesting, and you'll join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles by Ronald E. Bowers. See you then.